Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 9th of November. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, no winner from Obama election, ratings agencies finally held to account, and Papua New Guinea wises up to economic hitman Ross Garnaut. So first, no winner from Obama election. Craig, no prizes for guessing the big news item of the week, the presidential election in the US on Tuesday. What do you want to say about it?
Well, I don't want to say very much at all, Robbie, because not being in the United States, anything that we try and report on is just going to be relaying the news media. I am flabbergasted that over $6 billion was spent on this extravaganza for absolutely no change. Well, there's no change and there is a change, because I think I'll let Mr. LaRouche speak from his latest weekly report, and he made these comments about 24 hours after the result. So I'll let him speak and then we'll come back and make some more comments.
What happened? The Republican candidate capitulated to Wall Street. That is, the Republican Party is strongly represented in Wall Street. And where he could have easily won the presidency on points by simply going at the question of the crime committed by the incumbent president, and failing to do that under pressure from Wall Street representatives or voices, the thing was lost. It was touch and go from that point on, and eventually it was lost. It was lost because of fraud by the Obama crowd and so forth, but at that point it became a lost cause, and obviously the Republicans just capitulated on what was given to them. Now that's what we're faced with. What are the consequences of this selection of re-election of this president? Well, first of all, it means that you're going to have the most terrible conditions the American people have had in the past centuries are going to suddenly hit. What's going to hit is a combination of austerity and hyperinflation. What's going to happen is the death rate in the United States among poorer people and others will increase. Nothing good as such will come out of this election's results. Therefore, we have to cope with the reality. Now, what's the reality? The reality is the likelihood of thermonuclear war, which would mean human extinction, virtual human extinction, will probably occur, unless we can prevent it by other means. But that's where we stand. We're headed for war. The Obama administration is a war administration, and if it can't be blocked in some way, it will happen. And if it is a war, and if it's a war on the nations now, it will be a thermonuclear war from which very few people are likely to survive. And maybe the whole civilization won't survive.
So Craig, there you have it. Austerity, hyperinflation and nuclear war.
Well, that's Robbie. We've been talking about this a lot on our program. We've mapped it out for our viewers in pretty systematic ways about how the current global financial disintegration is leading to these austerity budgets, particularly in Europe. I just want to come back for clarity of what Lynn is saying there is actually the last third debate. You know, Mitt Romney had the chance of exposing the crimes of Obama, and specifically that was the crimes of Benghazi, or as we call it, Benghazi Gate. That President Obama said no, specifically and clearly, to members of his administration and to the security forces about providing adequate security for the ambassador who was then murdered in Benghazi. Now, this could have been brought out by Mitt Romney, but of course, because of the Wall Street influences, he was told, don't go there, don't challenge this. At that particular time, Robbie, you had even Hillary Clinton in possession of prime evidence of this material, and she too was told, much to the disdain of her husband, you know, Bill Clinton, don't go with this. So there was a fix put in. So if both Mitt Romney had gone with this exposing the crimes of Obama being a warmonger in the sense of stopping the security from being provided for Benghazi, but also talk about the history of what he's done with the Libyan interventions, going to war against Libya illegally against the Congress, then he would have transformed the election. Didn't happen.
Well, and the thing is, because he is, Wall Street had two candidates, Obama and Romney.
Yeah.
When that's where all the money came from. But if Romney had to become president, as Wall Street's candidate, he would have been continuing the same Benghazi policy.
Yeah, well, there is a sense, when we say there's no change, there is a change. The change is that you've got the same president in there. So the change is that we now know what we're dealing with, right? And the question is how long Obama's going to be in there. I mean, the guy is impeachable now, and I think the analogy that we've been talking about here in our organisation is the whole question of Richard Nixon. I mean, because he was elected with, wasn't it a landslide?
He won. In 1972, Nixon won 49 out of 50 states.
Right. Yeah. How many did Obama win this time, Red? Do you know?
Well, a lot less, actually.
Yeah, right.
Romney did a lot better than Nixon's opponent. But Nixon was seemingly untouchable. But Watergate had happened before the election, and that ended up driving him out of office. Benghazi is worse than Watergate. No one died at Watergate.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, Watergate was a swindle. It was thieving and spying and stuff. Here you had the murder of a US ambassador. It was all being covered up. The other thing, Robbie, that people need to know is that nothing's changed in the Congress. I mean, you've got a Republican-controlled lower house and you've got a democratically controlled upper house. It's exactly the same stalemate as before. The Democrats and the Republicans didn't win anything in this election. And you're coming up to a situation where the global financial crisis is continuing to roll on. You've had QE, quantitative easing, 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, yep. Is it going to be 4, 5, 6 to a zillion? I mean, how long are they going to continue to print money? And this is what Mr. LaRouche was referring to in this question of hyperinflation, where you simply print the money, and this is what happened in the 1930s with Weimar Germany, where Germany couldn't pay its debts. It just ran the printing presses. And this is what the United States is going to be faced with, and the world, not just the United States, Australia as well, in the next period. So nothing's changed, but it has changed in a sense.
And on the question of austerity that LaRouche highlighted, because when in the cut and thrust election, Craig, people could be forgiven for interpreting the media and thinking that Romney was the austerity candidate, and of course Obama projects himself as empathetic to poor people. But austerity has already begun under Obama. The main factor of Obamacare, the health care, which is a system that orders everyone to buy private health insurance, is cutting $700 billion out of Medicare for elderly, right? That's austerity has already begun. And now Obama has already said that this negotiation by January 1st, what they call the fiscal cliff, will include entitlement reform, which means we're going to cut money out of what people need to survive. And the austerity is already on display in the pathetic response to Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, well, I think Bloomberg, the mayor of New York, I mean, a couple of years back, I think 2010, he actually said no to any surge protection of New York, right? Those areas of the eastern coast of the United States that actually put in the surge protection actually survived very well after Hurricane Sandy, but New York, of course, got flattened. Now, this is an example of the sorts of austerity policies that are put in by these economic rationalist types that want to basically privatise infrastructure under the guise of these current global hegemonic policies of globalisation.
Yep. All right. Well, that's why we wanted people to see what LaRouche had to say, because we are not Americans, but I think everyone's painfully aware that America is still the most powerful country in the world, and so the result is going to affect everybody.
And he wasn't understating, Robbie, the question of nuclear war. I mean, Obama gave tacit approval to Netanyahu. On the surface, he said, yes, we won't go with nuclear war or any sort of a war against Iran, which would bring in Russia. But behind the scenes, that we know that there was sort of like a nod and a wink, right, to Bibi Netanyahu. So Obama represents an extreme danger towards the world heading towards nuclear war. Yep.
And we've covered that danger in our latest New Citizen newspaper.
In fact, the last two, yeah.
Well, so that's the context in which people can understand what LaRouche is saying about that, which people can see on our website or order from the CEC. That will explain that part of it. But that's what's the state of play at the moment, And of course, we work with LaRouche and because we are the factor to try and stop it.
And we'll bring more of what Mr. LaRouche has said to this program so people get a really clear insider's view of what's going on.
All right, so we'll leave it at that. When we come back, we're going to talk about some good economic news, actually, how ratings agencies have finally been held to account. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Ratings agencies finally held to account. Ratings agency Standard & Poor's, Craig, committed fraud in the GFC. And it wasn't the only one. Fitch and the other ones did as well. Standard & Poor's was the big one. The GFC, if people remember, was the trigger was the subprime mortgages in America that were lent to people who couldn't afford them actually, but they were lent where the initial repayments were at very, very artificially lowered interest rates, and after a period of time, the rate adjusted to a rate they couldn't afford to pay, and they would default, right? Mm-hmm. And they were lending these like mad, and we had the same kind of thing happening in Australia, not on quite the same scale. But when the banks and other lenders would make these loans, they would then bundle up these loan agreements and on-sell them to sucker investors. So the banks themselves weren't actually left carrying the can.
So you had these instruments, these financial paper instruments that had no underlying actual value, but just a cash flow, bundled up from basically people who couldn't afford to pay the loan rates back anyway, and given these artificial ratings by private companies, not government regulated companies, that have a total interest in preserving the private system of finance.
Yeah, and Standard & Poor's was paid by the seller for the ratings.
Right.
So what the seller, what the banks would do was they'd take a whole heap of different types of mortgages and put them together. So those mortgages would include, gilt-edged ones from rich people, but they would include a lot of these ones, lent out to a lot of poor black people in Latin America. And so Standard & Poor's would just say, okay, those top ones, they're AAA, so we'll call the whole package AAA. And they were paid for that rating, right? So that's what Standard & Poor's did. And of course, when the rates adjusted en masse beginning in 2007 and then 2008, the whole thing blew up, and that became the trigger for the GFC, which blew out a hole in the whole global derivatives bubble. For that action, Standard & Poor's has got off scot-free. The banks have been in trouble. The different on-selling agencies have got in trouble, but Standard & Poor's has been allowed to get away with it. In fact, in America, in any court case, the courts there have found that Standard & Poor's ratings were just opinions. So they weren't a factor. Now, of course, that's garbage because those opinions set the rates. Whatever Standard & Poor's says the rating is, that sets the interest rates people have to pay.
So you hear these things called like AAA ratings or AAA plus ratings or whatever. So when they drop, say for sovereign governments like state governments from AAA down to AA plus, it means the interest rate might go from hypothetically 5 to 5.5%,
Exactly.
costing the government more. Now, that doesn't seem to me to be an opinion.
That's not just an opinion, that's real power. So anyway, for 4 years, the US courts have been saying that. Well, as of this week, an Australian federal court has ruled that that is not an opinion and that Standard & Poor's is liable for its rating. And this is in the case involved these councils who in Australia, a lot of local government councils were sold these types of investments. They called them CDOs, collateralised debt obligations, and they were literally taking ratepayers' money that they should have just been keeping in either spending on footpaths or keeping in a bank account somewhere, right? But under national competition policy, councils are ordered to function like businesses. They're ordered to put their money into high return investments, right? So they were suckers for these types of investments. And in this particular case, ABN AMRO, which is one of the Inter-Alpha group of banks, set up a subsidiary called Local Government Financial Services, which was designed to specifically target councils to suck them into these types of investments, and sold them these CDOs with a Standard & Poor's AAA rating on them, and they all went bad, some within weeks of being bought. Right?
Well, See, Robbie, a lot of the councils, of course, are made up of ordinary people who don't have years and years of so-called financial experience. So when these financial advisors come in, so say Moody's or Standard & Poor's have given this a AAA rating, immediately, oh, that's good. I mean, that must be a good product. If they came in and says, no, this has got a double B rating, that's a bit suspect, right? And that's how these things work. So this is a con right from the top. But I think the bigger issue here is that this is the way the global financial system has swindled and ripped off billions of dollars of money from ordinary people. This is the fix. It's like a horse race, right? Where you've taken the legs off the rest of the horses. Yeah. And that way, you know the winner's going to be the winner. Well, that's how these things work.
Well, and what the court case in Australia now becomes as a precedent, because for the first time a court has said, now hang on, you are not going to get away with this anymore. So now councils are able to sue Standard & Poor's for their role, and they're piling on, believe me. European councils in European local government authorities and other different outfits in Europe are now looking at the same decision. So this could become a precedent that starts to unravel this worldwide. But I think the bigger issue, Craig, is that you're talking about the nub of power of the monetary system, because you alluded to it, but we've got situations in Australia where the government of Queensland is slashing its budget in order to meet the criteria for a AAA rating set by Standard & Poor's.
Robbie, this is where the re-regulation of the banking system freaks the hell out of these private interests. Because once you re-regulate the system where you have a government-owned bank, like a national bank, and you say, this is how the system's going to run, and it's run by the elected representatives of the country, you don't need this stuff. Because the decisions are made at the level of a sovereign government for the purposes of developing the economy, not by private individuals, private banks, private ratings agencies, for the benefits of private shareholder profits.
Well, they say it's the market setting it, but that's a charade for what you've just said. It's all done to manipulate for themselves.
And that's why we go back to this policy direction of what we've been talking about a lot again on this program, but Mr. LaRouche has led the fight for, is a return to Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall banking policy, which is actually very simple legislation. It says no, banks cannot be involved if they want to be a trading bank in this, a commercial bank in this sort of activity. No to speculation, no to derivatives. You can't be a brokerage house, you can't be an insurance company and be a bank at the same time. Very simple language that says no, you can't do this. Now that's the directionality we have to get back to, otherwise even more people are going to lose their shirts, whether it be local councils or private institutes, like hospitals and so forth that have been investing in these things.
So if you're a Queenslander who's watching your health system get gutted by the Newman government in order to get a AAA credit rating, you need to bail up your local member of parliament and say, why the hell are you doing this to impress convicted fraudsters? Because that's exactly what has just happened. All right, we'll leave that subject there, and when we come back, we're going to finish off with good news about Ross Garnaut. Welcome back to the CEC Report. And now we have a very interesting political development, Craig, where to our north, Papua New Guinea has wised up to economic hitman Ross Garnaut. What's happened is the fairly newly elected Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Peter O'Neill, has told the Papua New Guinea Parliament that the Australian economist Ross Garnaut, who Australians should remember from Rudd setting him up to be the climate change guru.
But he was also the author of what, Productivity Commission reports? Or
well, the free trade, the landmark free trade report in the late 80s that started tariff cuts, Garnaut wrote. He was Rudd's boss when Garnaut was the Australian ambassador to China in the late 80s. He was Bob Hawke's principal advisor when Bob Hawke was Prime Minister on things like...
So this guy is an economic hitman.
Well, if people go to our website, they will see our dossier on him where we list what he's done, and we've called him an economic hitman. So we're quite excited about this news, and especially because of the issue that it's over. So what's happened is, the other thing that Garnaut is known for, of course, which makes this even more significant, he is the architect of Papua New Guinea's economy. Garnaut's first main name he made for himself was when Papua New Guinea was decolonised in 1975. Garnaut was the man deployed from Australia to set up its economy for post-colonialism. And what he did is he set it up to be continual colonial economy in practice, not in name, because he made it a resources-based economy, right? And the irony is, here's Papua New Guinea, which has a small population. It's one of the richest chunks of dirt in the world, right? It's so fabulously rich in resources. It's being mined to death by the biggest corporations in the world, yet its people are the poorest in the world, right? And that's what they were set up to be by Ross Garnaut. And it looks like the people of Papua New Guinea have wised up. In this particular case, until last week, Garnaut was the chairman of Octedi Mining. Now, people may remember Octedi from the scandal in the 90s when BHP owned it and ran it, and it terribly polluted this major river through Papua New Guinea. And it was a terrible environmental polluting act.
I think it was running green or something, some ridiculous, incredible.
You can see pictures of it. Look up the Octedi story. It was so bad, BHP said, okay, we won't own this mine anymore. What we'll do is we'll put it in a trust, and that trust, they called it the PNG Sustainable Development Program, and so Octedi Mining's profits went to that trust to be spent on sustainable development programs in PNG, which seems fine, except for this kicker. The management of this PNG Sustainable Development Program was run from Australia by these business guys, including Ross Garnaut. And Ross Garnaut has retired now, and he talked about this money that this from Octedi, but he talked about it in very patronising terms, implying that you cannot trust the government, the elected government of PNG with that money, because, implying they might be corrupt. That's what he said, quote, "Naturally, with such an accumulation of wealth in a poor country, it's very tempting for political figures to think of better ways of using it right now than putting it into long-term development." In other words, we will decide how this money is spent, not the government of Papua New Guinea. And so for saying that, the Prime Minister Peter O'Neill has said, you are no longer welcome in this country. Craig, when I saw this story, apart from knowing the background about Ross Garnaut, the actual issue for the people of Papua New Guinea struck me as very much a parallel of what old Labor fought here in Australia, which is, does the elected government that represents the people control the money system, or do private, non-elected financial types control, that Labor called the money power, control the system? It's the same fight, isn't it?
Well, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the Whitlam era and the idea of buying back the farm, where the intention was to basically nationalise the resources industry back in the 70s, which, if that hadn't been done, Robbie, I mean, despite everything else that Whitlam was known for, would have been an incredible boom for our country, because all that we could have been value adding all the economy from the point of view of those basic resources. But that didn't happen. What did happen was that he was sacked. And we've always said that the reason he was sacked is because he was moving in this direction of actually looking at having the nation control the resources. And here you have a head of state, again, taking on these big mining companies. I do fear that Peter O'Neill is taking on issues that he may not be familiar with.
Well, the last time something like this happened in PNG, Sir Julius Chan in 1997 tried to regain sovereign control of Bougainville copper, and he got deposed for doing that. So this
is an issue that gets to the heart and the core of national sovereignty. This goes against the general direction the world's going right now of smashing sovereign nation states. So it's going to be a very interesting thing to watch, and we give him our support to go, fight these guys as hard as he possibly can.
Yep. So watch how you see this reported in the media, because our media is patronising, it's colonial, it is racist. So see through that and look at the big picture, and we'll report on updates in this forum. But that's it for this week's CEC Report. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in next week for more.